Nicoleralston, and I'm a life and productivity coach that helps you get what you need to get done while still making time for fun and joy. And I'm really excited to dive into today's topic. I have academic coach Gretchen Wegner joining me today. And I feel like the topic is just so current and important. I've talked to many students who are very excited about this chat. Gretchen is going to provide a lot of tips to help make your studying more active as opposed to passive, and more productive, be more efficient about it. So hopefully you find this helpful as we're all learning how to navigate the online learning space. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Gretchen on.
Yes. Hi. Hi. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like I said, I have a lot of people who are really excited to catch this chat. If they're in class right now, they said they're going to watch it after. So on that note, just quickly, we will have time for questions at the end. If you do have a question that pops up in the middle, go ahead and drop it in the comments. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and just get started with a couple of things we thought would be useful to all of you who are learning online right now. So the first thing I actually want to do is introduce Gretchen and explain exactly what an academic coach is, because a couple of people were like, oh, that's interesting. What is that? So, if you could kind of talk about your job a little bit and what you do.
Yeah, so an academic coach, often people are like, is that like a tutor? And so what I want to say is, because we all have experiences, I think, with tutors, either at school or outside of school. So a tutor helps you understand something you're having trouble understanding. So like if it's like something in math, the Pythagorean theorem, the tutor explains that to you. An academic coach, however, gets really curious about, why are you having trouble in the first place learning the Pythagorean theorem? Does it have to do with the way you organize your stuff? Like, do you have trouble finding your notes that you took in class? Maybe your teacher teaches in a way that is not natural to you, and so you have trouble understanding the teacher. Maybe you don't understand your textbook. Maybe it has to do with distractions, where you say that you're actually studying and doing your homework well, but actually maybe there are a bunch of distractions happening. So we look at your process, the way you do your learning, and I help usually in the areas of time management, organization, study skills. A lot of schools don't really teach study skills, so students don't have them. And then also self-advocacy, like how to ask better questions and get your needs met better with your teachers and your other people. So hope that's clear.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And when I first discovered Gretchen, I was so excited because these are things that I often taught my students indirectly, but I didn't actually have the vocabulary around it the way you described it. And this year I was subbing for an algebra class, and I was like, oh, I know exactly how to explain studying now in a way that's helpful, because usually as a teacher, and I'm guilty of this, I'll just be like, don't forget to study for your test, but I don't always say what that means. So maybe we can just start with that. What is studying? Like, what should people be doing when they're supposed to study for a test?
Well, and Nicole, as you know, if I'm going to answer that question, I'm going to have to bring in my whiteboard, right?
Yes, I love the whiteboard.
And I've not actually used a whiteboard on the little camera of, the iPhone. So we'll see how this goes. But in order to explain studying, and actually, there's a really easy formula for how to study. But in order to understand that, it's better to understand first what the brain needs in order to learn anything. So I thought I would share that, and that's where the whiteboard comes in. So, and forgive my weird little doodles, like you probably can't tell what this is, but I call this a basket. It's like a container, and it's the basket of knowledge and skills. So it's like everything that you need to learn in that class or to pass that test or in order to do a project. It's all the facts and ideas or skills you need to be able to have first. So let's pretend. Shall we pretend pick a topic, a subject, Nicole? What class are we studying for right now?
Well, I mean, for me, it would be algebra. So my students have to study for an algebra test.
Okay, so we'll stick with math for now. So this is everything you need to, and in math, there's a lot of skills. There's knowledge, but there's also skills we have to show that we need. So, the first thing when we're learning something is we've got to be exposed to the information for the first time. So we've got to, and this is step one, we've got to get the information from outside of us into our brains. And that's what this is right here. This is a little figure with the brain. And the fancy brain terminology, like the brain scientists call this the encoding process. We're creating code in our brain for the information. You also could just call it learning, or you could call it teaching, but it's your first exposure to the information. Usually, first exposure happens in the class, right? Like the teacher, especially in math, is giving a little lecture showing you how to solve a certain kind of problem. Sometimes first exposure happens before class, though. Like teachers will ask you to review pages in the textbook or do a reading or whatever. And so sometimes the encoding process happens outside of class, but that's your first exposure when you're reading that information. So the second thing we need to do, because actually most learning stops here. Students just receive it from the teachers and just assume they should be able to spit it back out on the test, right?
Yes, and that's what I loved about the study cycle is I hear students say that a lot where they're like, oh no, like she explained it and I don't get what she's saying and now my life is over. I can't figure it out. Where it's like, or they'll just watch it again. So they'll watch it again and be like, okay, I watched it like 3 times and I still don't get it, but they're not doing the next step, which is taking action on that. Yes. So that's why I was excited about, you'll see it's a cycle because there's another part. So I'll let Gretchen go ahead.
And I love, Nicole, I didn't actually call it the study cycle yet, but you just introed that. So we'll say that ultimately this is the study cycle. Yes. So step 2 is once we've had our first exposure to the information, then we need to do a crucial thing, and it's on the other side, and it's step 2. So actually I'll put a 2 there. And that is that we need to test ourselves. We need to see what we know and what we don't know. And when you hear me say that, you might be like, oh, duh, I thought it was going to be something fancier than that. Like, that's not very fancy to test ourselves. But it is something that the brain really, really, really needs us to do so that we know whether we have that skill or that piece of knowledge right or wrong. And once we know whether it's right or wrong, if we have it right, we don't need to study it anymore right now, right? Because we kind of know it. We should come back to it later, but for right now, while we're studying, we don't necessarily need to. But if we have it wrong, then, and I know you know the answer already, but I'm going to ask you anyway, Nicole, as if you were one of my clients. So if you have the information wrong, there's one more thing we need to do on the cycle. And what do you think it might be?
It would be, you eventually have to learn it. So I have to do something about that to actually learn it as opposed to, not.
Right. Exactly. And so that thing that we have to do with it is back on the encoding side of the study cycle. And it's we need to encode again, or we need to learn it again. But this time, the first time the teacher taught it to us or the textbook taught it to us, this time we have to teach it to ourselves in a process that I call encoding, but doing it in a new way. And I call my approach to working with students the anti-boring approach, because what I see is so many students learn in such boring ways, you guys. Like you just sit and reread the textbook or review your notes and you just feel like falling asleep and it's so boring to the brain. And so part of learning how to study is learning how to pay attention so you're learning it in the first place. But then also learning how to test yourself in creative ways. Don't wait for the teacher to test you. No. Test yourself in 2 or 3 minute spurts. And then the stuff that you don't know, what are some creative and interesting and anti-boring ways that you can encode in a new way so that you actually find it interesting to study and you learn it so well that when the teacher does test you, when you get to the official test, you actually are able to rock it and prove that you know it. And that is the study cycle.
And there's a couple of things I have to point out that I love about this. One is the fact that I'm the type of person, and I'm sure there's lots of you who are like this, you zone out for part of the Zoom video or like you just didn't get it, and you're like, oh, well, I'll watch it again later. And then you feel bad because you probably don't watch it again later, because if it was kind of boring the first time. It's probably going to be boring the second time. I used to do this in college myself where I'm like, well, I'm just going to record the lecture and I'll watch it again later. And I never did. And then I would feel a little bit bad about that. So now I just don't feel bad about that. And I find another way to learn the information, like you said, as someone who takes a lot of online courses. The other analogy I like to give people with this, and this was actually really helpful for coaching swim this season. Unfortunately, the season got canceled, but I actually used this study cycle a lot because it's easy for swimmers to get that, like, okay, you watched somebody do, I teach beginner swimmers. So it's like you watch somebody swim something perfectly. Nobody expects that, oh, okay, now you can go ahead and swim in the Olympics because you saw an Olympic swimmer swim, so now you know what to do. We're always like, okay, well, you have to practice in order to learn, and it is vulnerable. So, like, for those of you who are like, oh my God, I feel so bad at this, like, that's okay. Like, it's new. You're supposed to feel a little awkward. And then you tell me, okay, well, my arm feels awkward. And then I go, oh, okay, well, I can help you figure, and it might take me a couple of times to explain how to get your arm working the right way. But, just telling me, like, I know something's weird, is really helpful. So, like, yeah, it was really helpful actually with coaching swim. And I feel like that's such a good analogy for class too. Because with class, people feel like, oh, I'm supposed to be an Olympic swimmer now. It's like, no, you're not. You're just supposed to.
You know what?
Yeah.
And I think teachers forget. So any teachers listening, I think we forget how vulnerable it is to learn. And there always is a moment in any learning. I'm taking a class right now myself, and I'm a 46-year-old woman, and I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. Like, that was the thought that came into my head, because it's hard and you suddenly are faced with all this new information or skills. And it's like, oh my God, there's no way I can do that. Something must be wrong with me. And that feeling, something must be wrong with me, is a very natural part of learning. But the key is not to believe it.
Yes.
Right? The key is to notice, oh, I'm at that really hard place in my learning. Okay, nothing's wrong with me. It's just our kind of messed up culture that makes us think we have to be perfect right away. I don't have to be perfect right away. But I do need to take the next right actions to help me learn it. And the next right actions are embedded here in this cycle. So, and the next right action is different for everybody. Like, you might be like, oh, I need to test myself now. And like swimming a length of the pool would be an example of testing yourself. Somebody else might be like, I actually need to encode this information in a new way first. Maybe I need to write it out or draw some pictures or make a chart or underline some things in the text before I can test myself. So there are all kinds of different things you can do, but don't give into that story that you're stupid. Just take the next small, right, anti-boring action.
So I know we're kind of limited on time, but if you could maybe talk about the different actions you could take. I'm forgetting what the name of it is, but learning something in a different way. What are some ways that students can do that so they also know that it's okay to learn that way? Because I always find that, I'm supposed to read from the book. I'm supposed to watch this video. I'm supposed to do this. So, like, what are some ways that you would tell students, let's try this instead? Or what do you think? Or I don't know, what would you do if a student was like, I don't know how to encode in any way?
Yeah, so there's a little checklist that I like to give. I don't have time to teach you the whole thing on a different whiteboard right now, but you can just think about your senses, right? So, like, have you spoken it out loud to someone? Have you called a friend and said, hey, can I try and teach this thing that I just learned to you? Or have you spoken it out loud to your parents or spoken it out loud to your dog? I know that might seem really silly, but like, if we can explain it, then we know it. Another sense is our eyes. So have you made the information visual? A lot of kids get in trouble for doodling. And I want to say that doodling is fabulous. And those of us who are more visual that way and who like to doodle can draw pictures of information. I also, like, I did this yesterday with one of my 8th grade clients. We turned everything into a chart. So we looked at the information and it seemed like there was so much of it. And we just took a moment to think about what are the different categories here. And then we made a chart. We were like, oh, look, there are like 4 different things that this prompt is asking me to reflect on. So then we labeled each of those things. This was in English. And then we're putting the characters down here. And and we just filled out the chart. Like for this character, their role in the story is blah, blah, blah. And I don't remember what they are now, but making something visual, whether it's visual like a chart or whether it's literally like drawing pictures of vocabulary words can be a way to help you really connect in.
Thank you. And one of the other things that I know a lot of people are really eager to hear about is this online learning environment right now. So if you are a teacher that's watching this, Gretchen has a separate video, and please send me a message if you're interested in watching it, on how to teach an online course. But as a viewer, I'd love to hear, she had some great ideas. So one of the things that you mentioned that I was like, I have never thought about this before. So for those of you that are watching this right now, is the fact that you get so zoned into your screen, like you're just looking at me and Gretchen right now, and that's your entire world, where that's not how the brain normally works. Normally, you are making a whole 3D map of the room. So like when I was watching that lecture, I was like, oh yeah, I'm in my room right now. But like, it's really easy to forget that. And that did, I realized, relieve a lot of stress. So what are some other things that you've noticed, if you want to maybe explain a couple? So for me now, when I take online courses, I'm like writing on my notebook and just like looking away now. I'm making a conscious effort to do that, or just like look at, I don't know, whatever's on the shelf right now, just to make the room bigger, because I did notice, I was like, oh, I do feel claustrophobic. So yeah, what are some other things that you've noticed about just the online learning environment that might be helpful for people to, break up?
Well, and one thing is to pay attention to where you've put your camera and how it's affecting your body. Like right now, actually, I'm in a position that's not a good long-term position. I knew this was a short Facebook Live, so I was okay with it, and I wanted you to be able to see my face. But I have a few different places around the house where I can sit with my body in different ways. So right now I'm on the couch. Another thing that I can do, let me actually just do it to model it, is sit with my legs crossed. Whoops. It just
okay.
So like just taking care of your body. There are my whiteboards here. Can you see my legs? They're crossed. So I can do this. I can sit at my desk and sit at a table for a while. So I like to stand. So sometimes I sit on the floor with my legs spread out. So putting your body in different positions can be really, really helpful in online learning, as well as doing, Nicole, what you mentioned. And actually, I'd invite everybody to do right now, which is like maybe play a game. Like, what red things can I see in my space right now in the next 3 seconds, you know? Because, it just relieves the pressure of the eye. Eyes like to see long distance, and they like to see close up. Another thing that I did, well, I said a little bit in that webinar, but I really want to say to everybody right now is one of my 8th grade client who I saw yesterday, she has been admitting that she multitasks during the calls because the teachers are recording their lectures. She's like, oh, I'll watch it later. And so she gets all her other homework done while she's technically there in the live room, virtual room with the teacher. And that is a really bad idea, y'all. I know it feels like a good idea, but it's very draining to the brain. Actually, it exhausts you faster, and you really don't actually learn and hear what the teacher is saying. So what I really want to encourage people to do is what you said, actually, that you've been doing, which is, since we're online so much, have a notebook, have a piece of paper, use your hands while you're listening, take notes in real space, in something that you can manipulate, so that you're not just zoned into the virtual space and multitasking online as well.
I would have to say I 100% agree with that. I'm taking an online course right now. And when I started taking online courses about a year or two ago, I'd always be like, okay, like I'm just going to do this thing and I'm watching it. And then 2 things would happen. One, I would have to rewatch it because I missed something that I actually cared about. And then I was like, oh, great. Now I have to rewatch it again. Or I realize now I would just completely miss information. And then, like you said, it was hard to focus. So I never did anything well. I felt like I wasn't doing whatever the second thing was well. I wasn't paying attention to the online class. And then it just ended up being kind of a waste of time. So then, like, there's a class that I'm actually rewatching again because I realized I didn't watch it the first time. And I'm like, oh, I should have really just sat down and taken notes when I sat down and watched it the first time. So, if you're a student, don't feel bad. Adults do it too, whatever age you are. It's hard to not want to multitask, but I find that I just go like full screen now. So like I'm not tempted, and I plug my phone in another room because I'm like, I just don't want to even tempt myself to try to multitask because I know it just ends up getting to be a waste of time. Which is
Totally.
And there was one other thing that thought brought up about multitasking, and I can't remember what it is right now. Oh, the other thing that I thought was interesting that you mentioned as a teacher to do, but I would also encourage students was like showing them what you're doing. Like I feel like I'm a total like what's the word, teacher's pet. So if I were actually watching live, I would be just sitting like this the whole time to make sure that they knew I was watching, which is awkward. Like I love what you brought up. So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Well, when you say showing them what you're doing, meaning the teacher showing the student?
Or even the student, I feel like sometimes the students feel like, okay, well, I have to make sure that they know I'm watching. Like, I remember when I first started doing these interviews, like, I'd be scared to drink water because I'm like, well, I want to make sure that.
Let yourself be a body in space.
Yes,
Let yourself be a body in space. And some things change a little bit. Like, you'll notice I talk with my hands a lot. And in real life, if I were talking to you, I would not have my hands up near my face talking. That would be really weird to do that. But I have learned how to bring my full body into the camera space. I've also done something really purposeful already in this live video where I know we're not supposed to be touching our faces necessarily, but wash my hands this morning. I live alone. Like I purposefully touch my body in the camera as a way to remind people, even if it's unconscious, people watching are like, oh, she's a real body in space.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm this right now.
And people watching, it's more interesting to see people who are moving their hands, who are touching themselves. Sometimes I'll listen this way, and it's good for the people watching, but it's also good for me to have the warmth and heat of my own body here, and then bringing objects into the space. Like I think it really makes it more interesting, right? To bring the whiteboard in. Or there was a moment in our webinar where there were 100 people in the webinar, and I had folks all just pick something that's in your environment and hold it up. I'm working on a puzzle right now, y'all. And that makes a difference. And I don't exactly know why it makes a difference, but I know it does. It makes it a more alive and human environment to let ourselves have props and things.
I totally agree about the human thing because it's funny. So since I'm a life coach, I'll be coaching clients, and a lot of them like to do video, and I'm always like, okay, I want to make sure they know I'm paying attention to them. So I used to not drink anything, but I would be thirsty. Usually my calls are like an hour. So if I'm talking for that long, I need to drink something. And after I watched that, I'm like, oh, why am I so weird about that? Nobody really cares. And I think the first time I did it, I noticed it also invited them to like take a sip of water, whatever they needed to do while we were in the middle of the session. So I just encourage you all too, if you're taking notes, if you feel like, okay, does the teacher think I'm not paying attention? Like you could even just kind of bring it up so they, if you feel the need, self-conscious about that, so they know what's going on. And like you said, to be a human in real space in this virtual online environment, I think is super helpful.
And teachers, you can invite that in too, or students, you can be like, hey, these are the notes that I took. Like it's actually something that you can't do in real life, that you can, like in real classrooms, that you can do online. Hey, everybody, I just invited you to draw an image of blah, blah, blah and label it with the whatever. Everybody hold it up to your camera and look at the notes that everybody else took. What a cool thing to be able to do. And then it also encourages students to be doing things like taking notes because they know you're going to ask them to hold it up at some point and show everyone.
So, on that note, if anybody has questions, I encourage you to drop them in the comment section now, just because we are rounding out our time. But one of the things that you had mentioned earlier is even just communicating with teachers. How do you encourage clients to communicate with teachers? Especially right now, I feel like it's important, and it's probably very welcome, because I know teachers are feeling just as uncomfortable and unsure about like what to do as you are. Especially a lot of teachers, this is their first experience teaching online. So how do you encourage students to go ahead and have those conversations if they're having an issue?
Well, one of the things that I notice is students are really scared of their teachers judging them. And so students who are listening right now, I mean, if you could raise your hand, you can't, but it may be like, give a thumbs up if you ever feel that way, or just say, I feel that way.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm taking a class right now. I feel that way with my teacher. I'm just fascinated. And so what we have to remember is teachers want to help us. And see, now there are all these thumbs up.
Well, good. You are not alone.
You are not alone. And it's a human thing. It's not a student thing. It's a human thing to be scared of judgment from the expert. But really, the experts are there to help us. And one of the things I do with students is I have them actually practice asking questions. Like, they're just so afraid they're going to seem stupid to the teacher. And so we practice, like, well, what can you ask? And right now, you'll be asking questions by email probably, or text. I don't know how many teachers are using something like Voxer, where people can ask questions with their voice, but that would be a wonderful tool to use. If you don't know of it, it's Voxer. So I do that with students, as I have them practice, or we'll write the email together. And but students, what you can do is I think it, like, having yourself like challenge, like, just say, I'm going to ask a question every day of one of my teachers. I'm just going to practice that skill, because you know what? That is the way. See, here I'm pointing to the camera right now. That is the way to do better in college, is to make a point of seeking out your professors, but you have to seek them out in college. So use your high school learning right now as a way to practice. How do I figure out? I don't think I have anything to ask, but let me challenge myself to find a question and to reach out anyway to my teacher, and just decide to do like one reach out a day, so that you can feel your panic, like, oh God, I'm worried that I'll feel stupid, but then you practice taking action anyway. And the more you do that, the less stupid you'll feel.
Oh my gosh, I 100% agree. And if anybody is watching that's in high school right now, it's so easy, and you'll see this when you get to college. It is way easier to ask teachers questions in high school. I feel like just the barrier feels easier than it does in college, because in college you don't necessarily have the banter every day, where you get that opportunity more in high school. And I remember in college, I challenged myself one quarter to actually go to office hours, even if I didn't have a real question. And then I applied for a scholarship that year, and I was like, oh yeah, I actually know somebody who can write a letter of rec, because they know my face. Like, it wasn't even about like, did I do well in their class? Like, even the teachers who I did well in their class, sometimes they didn't know who I was necessarily, but I was like, oh, that person knows my face, and I could probably ask them for a rec, and they would be happy to do it, because they were just nice to me in office hours. So I encourage that to people as well.
Yeah, and it occurs to me to say that with the study cycle, once you know the study cycle, you can use the study cycle to figure out what to ask. You could be like, I'm going to go talk to my teacher right now, and I'm going to actually ask my teacher to test me on something. Or I'm going to test myself before I go to the teacher, and then I'm going to go and tell them one thing I had trouble with and see if they'll encode it with me in a new way. So when you know the study cycle, you can decide where you are on the study cycle and then use it for self-advocacy.
I love that. And, again, just to bring the analogy back to swim, that's what I was telling the students. Like, first lap, just get out the awkwardness. The whole thing can feel awkward. It's fine. Second lap, start to think about, okay, what is feeling awkward? Because then you can ask a question, as opposed to like, I just feel awkward right now. It's hard for me to give you any direction other than like me trying to spot you, which if there's like, 30 people in the pool, I can't necessarily spot everybody at one lap. But if the second lap you go, okay, I think it's my foot, like my right foot is being weird. Then I'm like, oh, okay, well, I know I can do something about that. I just can't do something about like just general awkwardness, other than to encourage you to keep trying and seeing if something you can notice something. Right. So yes, that's such a great tip.
And the tweak about that, I would say, is that if you can't figure out what feels awkward, it's still okay to go to the teacher or the swim coach and say something feels awkward, because then that person will be watching you and paying more attention the next time. So that is okay to do if you can't find something more specific to ask.
I agree. And it's funny, a lot of people will be nervous to ask me about general awkwardness, but I'm always like, usually only one person or two people at a time ask, and I can watch one or two people. I just can't watch 30 at once. So yes, definitely, even if you are feeling awkward and don't have a specific question, definitely still go in and show them your work, because a teacher can see, oh, you're doing fine here, but it's just this one part that you're stuck on. So yeah, definitely, even if it is general awkwardness, yes, please do ask questions. So as we're wrapping up our time here, I do want to give people some more, where can they find, I know you have lots of other tips, so where are they able to find any videos or just information that you have on studying it in general? And then also, how are they able to contact you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, so I do have a YouTube channel. That's where most of my tips come out. Every week I come out with a study tip that's meant for students, but teachers also find them really useful to pass along to students. And I think if you just put in Gretchen Wegner, I think that's the name. Gretchen Wegner Coaching is the name of my channel in YouTube.
I'm going to type that in right now.
Okay, I think I'm right about that. Nicole made me start this Instagram, so maybe I'll start Instagramming more. But also, I send out a lot of resources by email. And so you can go to my website, GretchenWegner.com, and there's a way to sign up for the newsletter, and then you get an email. I do want to say, for any teachers who are tuning in, and this is hot off the press, I just decided it an hour ago, I'm going to do another free webinar, the same one that I did, called Zoomed Out, how to stay energized during a long day of video calls. And that's going to be next week, next Thursday. So if you're interested in signing up for that, you may want to just pop me an email via my website, GretchenWegner.com. And if you can just add my first name to that, Gretchen@GretchenWegner.com. That's my email address. And I'll make sure that you get the information for how to do that. I also think I'm creating a very small, less expensive, like under $50 course for teachers, where we'll go into more depth in how to work with office hours, like online office hours, online classes, online coaching. So anyway, that may be coming, but at least there is going to be the free webinar next week again.
Oh, I'm so excited about that. I'm going to have to let my teachers know, friends know, especially about that. And for those of you watching, if for some reason you did miss something and want to come back, this will be on Instagram Live for 24 hours, I believe, is the window. And then I'm going to also try to get a recording of this and then send it to you, Gretchen, so we can post it, because these were some really great tips. Thank you so much again for joining me and helping out.
Yeah, and so much love to all of you. This is just really hard for everyone. And so in the moments you're struggling, just know that it's normal. And in the moments that you feel like you have more energy and you're struggling less, give some love to somebody else.
I agree. Thank you for that as well. All right. Well, take care and take care, everybody. Have a great rest of the day and your week. Bye.
Bye.